Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years, pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Okay, here's the thing. Life has been kicking my ass a little bit this summer. And as I thought about how to mention this on the podcast, because I haven't been as consistent in publishing episodes as I've wanted to be, I realized that I needed to trust you all as yoga professionals. Because in our yoga space, we have a lot of space and grace for people to move and grow and get their act together. In fact, you could argue that yoga is made for those moments. The moments where life has gotten you down and you are working hard to get yourself back up. So that was my summer. Honestly, my last 5 months, really. But I am back with our regularly scheduled programs, talking again about yoga teacher training programs. And I have 5 more episodes to share with you in this series. And then I am moving on to leadership and what it means to be a leader in our space. Now, for our back to school podcasts happening in this September, talking about YTTs, I'm starting off with a true slam dunk of a conversation with none other than Anjali Rao. You may know Anjali as the president of the Accessible Yoga Foundation when they were active, and I'm going to be honest, I absolutely love her so much, and I love what she had to say. I think you're going to as well. But first, if you could do me a couple of favors, I would really appreciate it. If you could first tell the algorithm that you like me, you really, really like me, by following or subscribing to the podcast from wherever you're listening, that would be amazing. And next, head to the show notes and get on my newsletter. I have been rethinking all things on the newsletter recently, and I've decided that one of my favorite things is having conversations with people, obviously, and so I'm going to try and have more of those conversations in my newsletter. Coming up this month, I'm going to be sharing with you news about the IAYT, International Association of Yoga Therapists, and their recent moves and what folks are saying about it. Also, thank you so much to our sponsor, Midwest Yoga Conference and Midwest Yoga Magazine. Join us in person on October 26th in Des Moines, Iowa, to learn about all things yoga. You'll see me there live, along with several guests from the podcast. See the whole schedule and register at www.midwestyogaconference.com, and I will see you there. Now, let's get into it with Anjali Rao. Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Okay, so this week I have another conversation in our yoga teacher training series that we're doing on the podcast because I really want to dive deep into how we train. I feel like it is one of the most important things that we can talk about as an industry. And I have a new friend, Anjali Rao, on the podcast. So Anjali, will you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca, for inviting me for this important conversation and hopefully a juicy one. I'm Anjali and my pronouns are she, her. How do I introduce myself? I am a yoga practitioner, first and foremost, a student and a teacher, a educator, a space holder who really dives deep into the histories of yoga. And I say histories because there is a plurality to it, which is missed often, and really obscured, those which are obscured by heteropatriarchy and colonialism. That's like where my jam is, really. I'm a nerd, a very happy nerd. So yeah, that's pretty much what I do. I also am I'm a host of the Love of Yoga podcast, which centers people who are on the front lines of liberatory movements, as well as a few scholars in there who are doing some really critical work, and bringing into the center marginalized voices of all kinds and sorts. I used to be the president of the board of directors of Accessible Yoga until it sort of integrated or dissolved. And I worked closely with Jivana as well as the rest of the board and staff. So I'm on the faculty of many YTTs because that's, I'm bringing this up because I know that's what we're going to get into. And I have a few thoughts, opinions, feelings, what have you, to share about this subject.
I am so excited to hear your thoughts and feelings and opinions, to be honest with you. Like, there's so many juicy topics within this like big broad conversation of how we train. But okay, so you said you're on the board of some YTTs. I'm just going to ask you the question of the last 10 years. Is 200 hours enough?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay, the end.
Yeah, that's it. Let's be done with this conversation. Not at all. 200 hours is not enough. If you were to look at traditionally, because like I said, I'm a history buff. So if you were to look at how people were taught to be teachers, first of all, they had to be practitioners for a number of years, and I'm saying at least a dozen years minimum, and had to be in close relationship with their main teacher, had to live with them in some, in the ancient system of the Gurukul. But even after that went away, they were an apprentice first with their teacher and really followed them and did all the tasks that were allotted from the teacher. So that sort of transmission, which was a very personal transmission from the teacher to the student who's training to be a teacher, was a very intimate one in many ways. And I did that in some ways. I did that as a dancer. My whole background is an Indian classical dancer. And I studied with teachers for years, and I would never dare to call myself a teacher. So it's only the past maybe 2-3 years that I can call myself even a teacher, and I do that with great humility. So this notion that a person can be a teacher after 200 hours is, in my opinion, and a very humble one, ridiculous. And I've done that. I've done a 200 hours because at that time it was told to me that was the only way one could teach. And a lot of the places required, quote unquote, RYT 200 hours or 500 hours minimum. So I think 200 hours is the bare minimum, and what goes into those 200 hours is pretty much anyone's, whim and fancy.
Knows?
Yeah, who knows? So yeah, that's my answer.
Here's where I think it gets complicated, right? So, because I agree with you, 200 hours is not a lot of, like, I know people who've spent more than 200 hours completing a video game.
Right.
So, you know what I mean? Or like learning how to cook like a complicated paella or something. Like, you spend a lot of time on a hobby, and it's more than 200 hours. But my question becomes this. So we're in this industry that's like worth allegedly hundreds of billions of dollars. Like by the end of 2025, reports are saying us and Pilates are like 250 billion collectively together dollars. Mm-hmm. So in an industry that generates so much money, there has to be a standard, right? Like we have to say something of like, you have to do this to some degree.
So the money is
yes or no? Yeah.
Yes, but it's also a little bit more complex than that, because where is the money going? Like the money, yes, it's billions of dollars, right? But ask the teacher who is trying to make a living or a livelihood teaching yoga, quote unquote, even if it is asana, let's just for the sake of this conversation, let's say yoga is asana. And even a person teaching only asana, how many classes do they have to really teach for them to make a living or a livelihood, which is in a very capitalistic, very expensive world? Is it even possible? So why are we producing all these teachers is a big question, right? And who is the money going to? Yes, it is a $1 billion industry, but it doesn't trickle down to a teacher. It remains in the the prop making industry, the leggings and the blah blah, the Lululemons of the world, Alo Yoga, those kind of companies which make the money, not the teachers. So there is we have to be very clear about where this $1 billion is distributed and how it is not distributed actually.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so most of our money is in manufacturing of some kind or software. So like MindBody that runs
Yeah.
most studios, I think in itself is a $1 billion company. I think their valuation is something like $1 billion. Lululemon is well above that, like a huge valuation for them, and they started because of us. And we get like
Mhm.
in that money, you're right, in that money space, we get like, the yoga mats and all the other things that go with it. Athleisure wear is with us, and that's like
Yeah.
worth a ridiculous amount of money now.
Yep. Yep.
So,
So
but
the
we should
money
have a
doesn't go.
standard.
So the standard, it is so the standard, again, who sets the standards? And I struggle with this because who gets to set the standards? Because that's a lot of
Yeah.
power, right? And I mean, right now, who's setting the standards and how are they being held accountable to not only those standards, but ethics in general of hoarding resources? And I'm talking about Yoga Alliance here. They are the ones who set the standards. So where is accountability written in for that organization? It was funny because I went to India 6 months ago and I saw this big billboard right outside my parents' home, with this really ribbed teacher, fit and all of that, doing some ridiculous handstandish kind of thing, and in the tagline is written YTT certified, Yoga Alliance certified 500 hours teacher or whatever. And I just got a thing in my pit of my stomach that this is India that I'm going to, and the Yoga Alliance has now gotten into this ethos, the yoga ethos of India, and it's giving it's so powerful and it is so all over the place, that and nobody holds them accountable, and they have a lot of power. So my struggle with the setting standards is who gets to hold that, um, how did they get to hold that, who decided that they are the ones who are doing this sort of standard setting.
Yeah.
uh, so yeah, standards are definitely important. I think I was just reading that even all kinds of physical therapy, from physical therapists to hairdressers, at least thousands of hours go into training a professional. So even if you were to say, let's teach asana, forget about the rest of the stuff, just asana, but let's do it in a skillful way. Let's do it in a way which is uh, good and effective, and if all of that. Are we doing the right thing by mass producing teachers with very sort of ambiguous standards? And so that is the sort of the conundrum, I think. Who gets to hold the standards, who has the power, um, and what are we actually teaching, what are we actually training our students to teach, right? Are we teaching them to teach, and what are we teaching them to teach, you know it's so out there, like there is absolute, it's kind of like the wild west. It's like there is no governance or any
No.
such thing written in.
So when I originally, so for a long time on this podcast, I said I wasn't going to cover teacher trainings, partially because I see this to be our biggest problem. I also run a yoga studio and said for a very long time we weren't going to train at the studio because I wanted to make sure that I had a business model that made money without having to train teachers. Because I
Yes.
think that is part of, especially in the venture capital studios. So you're talking like your Core Power and your Yoga Six, like
Yes.
that's their model, right? Is that you get people in and then you train them and it's like this whole cycle of stuff. And I was like, I don't
Yeah.
want to do that.
Yeah.
But then I sort of realized when I don't, because there are people at my studio kind of looking at me like, so we really would love it if you trained. Like, so like we'd love to learn from you. And I thought, okay, so I want to unpack how do we even get to decide who teaches, who trains? Like training is a huge power. Like you're setting the standard for the industry. And so I talked to other yoga studio owners and they said, we train because we can't find qualified candidates anywhere. They're like, we find people who get their 200 hours in a $99 course online and I can't
Yeah.
let them teach.
Yeah.
Like it's this big mess. How do we how do we fix this mess?
How do you fix it?
Fix
How do
our
you fix
problems.
I think one of the main thing is building a relationship with your community. I mean, you have a studio or
Yeah.
even an online community, which is a lot of places started since COVID, right? Um, Building that community and the relationship within your students, and then seeing who really wants to teach for the sake, like, oh my God, this is a calling, this is something that I want to do, it's a passion, it's like, that kind of thing. And then cultivating and nurturing that personal relationship, and teaching, of course, getting a group of people together. You can't obviously do one-on-one teacher training, but getting a group of people together and doing it for the reasons which are not just economical. Because I used to teach, and I'll be honest with you, when I first started teaching, my 200 hours and then 300 hours and all of that, I knew at the very beginning that I wanted to be a teacher. Uh, at that, I didn't know what I wanted to teach. I started off teaching asana and pranayama and all of that. And then I got into philosophy. Once I started studying philosophy and history, I was like, this is it. Like, I want to teach only this, right? Uh, and it took me a while to figure out what and how I'll teach. And I could only do that because I had an insane amount of stubbornness. I did not. I went against
It's
the
true.
tide. You have to, right? You have to kind of have that sort of like bullheadedness. I tell this to my friends that I am just bullheaded. So I think to build that relationship is important. Getting a cohort together organically in some way is important, rather than. And I started teaching philosophy. The reason why I started saying the story is that I started teaching philosophy in my first the teacher training that I graduated, because everybody was like, oh, this, I know what I'm saying. I've studied all this stuff. Um, and they only did 2 teacher trainings every year, and that was their big source of income. Now, this is a small business. Studios are small business. There are, unless you're like one of the chains, and in which I don't even want to talk to you.
Yeah.
So even if you are like, typically it's owned by a woman, it's owned by studios are definitely mostly owned by women, and it's owned by not or marginalized, any other further marginalized community, like a black, brown, etc. Right, but very few of those exist also in the US. So for them to even survive, they needed a YTT. They needed 2 YTTs, and they were very honest about it. They were like, look, without this, we cannot survive. Now, the studio is also a community in so many ways, right? It is offering people a chance to just go get together. And in the modern world where we are so isolated from each other, that becomes a sort of a fulcrum for people's relationships. So I'm not a big fan of the studio model for so many reasons, but also I know that a studio can be so nurturing if done in a nice way, in a good way. So the YTTs become the economic machine for survival of a studio.
Yes.
So it's a really difficult thing to break through. I think what we need to do is sort of shift, and we should all do it together in some way or the other, that we should shift yoga education and yoga YTT. They're not the same. Why are you doing a YTT? Because now everybody's like, oh, you don't have to teach yoga. If you want to deepen your study of yoga, take a YTT. But that is not right. YTT in the name itself says yoga teacher training. So are we training our teachers to teach, right? If you want to not teach, but you just want to study yoga deeper for your own personal growth, which is what yoga should be, right? It should not be about teaching. It should be first and foremost about our own journey and our own path. Then offer programs and courses in your communities to deepen that particular whatever subject, course, content, whatever. So I think there has been so much conflation between yoga education and a YTT, and we need to kind of really sift through and create some sort of awareness in our communities to say, wait a minute, why am I doing a YTT? Let's be very clear about our goals and the real reason and the intention behind it.
So I do exactly that at my studio. And in fact, I would prefer, so I have a course, I will say this in case you don't know, I have a tea shop attached to my studio, right? So we sell loose leaf tea and spices as well. So pretty much all my marketing is tea. So the beginning course I call Brood, and it's a studentship course. It's how to be a better student. Because that's really what a lot of people want when they want yoga teacher training programs. Like nobody really, if you want to know how to be a more dedicated student of yoga, you're really not interested in what muscles you're using in Trikonasana. Like that's not relevant to what you're interested in. You're like, why does my yoga teacher seem like they know something I don't? That's the question people have. Why do they seem like they're a little bit more relaxed? Why do they seem like they can manage their life a little bit better? Why do they look like they're not crying in their coffee? Which, first of all, we are. But
yeah, I was just going to say, let me say that I don't know about all those things. I don't know whether I'm managing my life better or I'm not crying in my coffee.
But students do perceive us that way, absolutely. And that's the thing that I found they want to know is like this, the philosophy aspect of it, the living principles that come with a yoga practice, how to be more dedicated, how to actually skillfully use pranayama and meditation. Like that's a different thing altogether. You're right. Than like teaching pedagogy and teaching like how to teach people things.
Yeah.
Am I getting that right from what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to kind of ensure that the student is getting another avenue for their yoga journey, growth, evolution, whatever, rather than saying, you know what, this is all we have. We have 2 YTTs and you want to deepen your journey or your own understanding of what yoga is. This is all you have. And that's what most studios end up doing. There are very few courses and other ways in which a person can develop rather than so that sort of diversity in the community's offerings, I think, are key. And sort of teaching the student that, hey, yoga is more about your life rather than you wanting to be a teacher. And the syllabus and the curriculum and the pedagogy, as you said, of YTT should be centering around a person who has a strong fundamental personal practice, who has done enough internal work. Not that they're perfect, not that I'm perfect, not that you are, none of that, but at least we have some understanding of not only my body but my psychology and my emotional self. Like I have some sense of grounding of all those foundational principles, and then I can offer something to the community as a teacher, right? I to give you like a historical context, the apprentice would have to actually do so many things with their primary teacher before the teacher said, okay, now you're ready to go out into the world and share your gifts, right? It was pretty rigorous, and there is no rigor in our YTTs. Well, I've been a part of some of the YTTs where we're like, oh, you don't have to really do anything much. It's just really enjoy the whole process. You shouldn't be enjoying it. In some way, it is shaking your so many foundational parts of you, right? It is kind of groundbreaking. It should be the yoga YTTs, and I've been to a few of those courses where it changed my life in so many ways. It expanded everything, and that expansion is not easy. It's not enjoyable. It's like, holy fuck, what is this?
Yes, it's like deciding to set yourself on fire a little bit, and then being like, it'll be okay, I'm sure.
Yeah. So as a teacher, when you're graduating, are you do you have the skill set? Not that you'll do it perfectly, but do you have the skill set and the capacity, or know how to build that capacity to offer the same experiences to the people who come to your uh, classes and your offerings?
Okay, riddle me this, because this is the thing I have in my head. And I'm saying this ironically as a person who may run a teacher training this summer because I see the need and people are asking for it. I think teacher training, ultimately, if I was going to say 10 years down the line, doesn't belong in studios. I think you own a studio and that's your business. And those of us who own businesses run businesses, or
Mm,
your calling is to train people. And maybe that happens in a studio, but they're not the same. Like I
mm,
think that there shouldn't be a need to train teachers just because you're looking to hire a body at your business.
mm,
It should be because you want to up level the industry. And so I feel like that's part of the conflation there, is like sometimes, like you said, the studio, people are training for business reasons, not
yeah,
for integrity of the industry reasons. And I want them
yeah,
to be separate, because
yeah.
those are separate decisions and discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I think let's figure out how we can hold the people who are building those standards accountable, right? As a community, and I think we need to do it as a collective. It's not something that one person can do, because the organizations are so huge and powerful. And uh, yeah, I think we should definitely. This is something that I feel has changed the yoga world. I don't like calling it an industry, but though it is, it has changed the yoga world. The whole thing about YTTs, 200 hours, 300 hours, it's just become more, all of it is such commodification. It just adds to the commodification,
Yes.
the commercialization of it. And is there a balance somehow that we can strike as a a path? Yoga is a path of liberation, and are we really offering that? Like, let's be very clear on what we offer and why. If it is an asana thing, let's do an asana thing. Let's, if it is something more or different, that clarity is lacking. um
Yes.
and even in the, the standards of what a 200 hours is. I mean, I've been in all kinds of ITTs. Now I don't. Now I'm so clear about who I don't want to teach with. I am much more of a no person than I ever was. Um, that, there were some people who even use the words social justice oriented YTTs, and that is such bullshit, because at the end of the day, you're making a lot of money.
I
The
love you
words.
so much. I just have to say that. I love you so much. Go off right now. I'm so excited. Yes.
Because I think these are big words, and we are using those words without any understanding of what those words are, and at the same time making a lot of money for the people who are running them. To- Hundreds of people go there because you conflate things which are happening in the world, like racial injustice and gender injustice and all of that. You're using all of that, and then you're making up programs around those things, and not really offering the rigor for both social justice and YTTs. Both are not happening. It's a lot of conflation and not enough detail, not enough pedagogy, not enough integrity in those offerings. And I've been a part of those as faculty, and I don't anymore because of those reasons, because I feel like it was not doing the subjects enough, what do you say, uh, enough integrity around those subjects. So yeah, I think I talked, we were just talking before we started talking about how tokenism creeps in. People are using the world's pains, which are very real, marginalizations, or people with marginalized identities, almost as like front people, when the back and there is so much of corruption. And so I'm finding it harder to be idealistic. I am very idealistic person. I got into this whole, the outer, whatever yoga world, since COVID. Before then, I used to teach at hospitals. I used to teach at cancer treatment centers. That's where I started teaching, and I got into this front sort of online persona, whatever, since COVID, like many of us, right? And I'm finding it harder to be optimistic about the yoga world. I'm like, oh, this is such bullshit.
You say something that's really important that I want to highlight before you go on, and that is
Yeah.
that there's a real problem when you use the word social justice as marketing terms instead of a particular like philosophy and like living principle. And that happens so much in the yoga space that I
Yeah.
just want to scream. Like it's not a marketing term. Stop using
Oh.
it like that.
Yeah, it is not, and it is actually taking the labor of Black people, and Black people, trans Black people, non-binary Black people. We are using those words without understanding what those words really mean and how those actually interact and connect with yoga. Because
Yes.
just because, yes, the yamas and the niyamas, but the yamas and the niyamas were part of Ashtanga, which is a path toward sannyasi. It was a path toward us. It was an ascetic path. Patanjali Yoga Sutra is an ascetic path. So yes, yamas and the niyamas are fantastic to help us in behaving in ethical ways. But that's not you're conflating so many things together without having any clarity around how it is used. Just because you make a very smooth, slick reel on Instagram and has
Yes.
like thousands of likes, and it's whenever I see anything slick or in the binaries of anything, then you have to pause. And that's why you have to study history, because history tells you that nothing is in a binary, right? Appreciation and appropriation is not in a binary. There is so much of gray areas there, of different things happening. So when one is anything is happening in a binary, we have to pause, and say, okay, I'm getting sucked in, because it is a dominant cultural mechanism to be in a binary, and that is being used in the yoga world. So I talk about how the dominant culture replicates in yoga spaces. It is not immune to that. It is not away from that. It is a very much a part of that, and yoga is operationalized so much by dominant culture in so many different ways everywhere. So one has to be more discerning, and one has to be more discerning whenever they see anything in a binary.
Yes. I think especially when you're looking on social media and you see somebody who's telling you do this, not that, where
Yeah.
it's if you check the boxes, I've said this so many times, if you check the boxes, this is what makes you a good yoga person. And if you're not doing these check boxes, you're not a good yoga person. And I'm like, oh, but that's marketing. That's
Yeah.
not actual discussion and nuance about the conversation, because you give people the opportunity to skip the real work in between those two things, the
Yeah.
real like nuance and discussion. And that, I think you're so right, is really a problem, especially when it's found its way into teacher training programs.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, I have very strong feelings about how these concepts, especially people whose work is not really attributed to it, then nobody gives them people credit for those concepts, and they're just used, and somebody else is making all the money and get having all the credit for it. And
Yeah.
that really bothers me, and that's why I think I'm in a very tough place in many ways, because I can't work with so many people.
It bothers me too, and it bothers me because I actually see it hurting us as much as anything. Like there's harm caused there too, and it's almost like, you're trying to like take away the part that is the actual evolution, which it's like skipping to the end. It's like trying to get the
Mhm.
handstand without doing, if you're going to use like an asana term, like you go straight to the handstand
Yeah.
without all the prep work in the middle of it. And we all
Right.
know the transformation, the strength all happens in that middle ground, and you can't skip it. And you can't give somebody a checklist in order to make them a good person, or specifically a good white person. Like, and
Yeah.
I know white people really want that. Like, I'm
Yeah.
I'm a white
Yeah.
person, I'm going to speak for us. We really want someone to slide us a checklist across the table and be like, okay, so I don't say namaste at the end of class. Good for
Yeah,
me. Okay, so I don't
exactly.
do this. I'm a good person here. I use the Sanskrit terms as well as the English terms. Like, okay, I'm so good. And I
Yeah,
was like, yeah, but we're still appropriating yoga. So now what? Like, now can we have a conversation?
yeah. This whole thing with namaste and the om and the thing, those are some really what do you say? Superficial ways of, and I'm not dissing
It's
people who
true.
talk about it, but it is really not really getting into the complexity of anything. Namaste and om and all of that. A lot of people get triggered when you use that, and people who are South Asians, who are caste oppressed, they don't want to use all those words because of Sanskrit. Sanskrit was not accessible to people from caste marginalized identities. So let's not get, that's why it's very important for us to not get into the binaries of do this, do that checklist, which comes in, and many people have built entire careers around them.
Yes. I always look at that and I'm like, especially the namaste thing. I'm like, is this the hill we're really dying on?
Yeah,
Is this
because
where our
and
fight
I tell
stops?
people, and I tell people that too. I said, you know what? I really don't give a fuck whether you say namaste or not. Doesn't matter. But tell me what else you do, right? How do you teach? How do
Yes.
you hold space? What do you know? Who are the people you center? Who do you learn from? Who are the authors you're studying? What are some of the relationships you have with people from South Asia or Black communities? How are you otherwise centering and amplifying them if you are white? So those are some of the things, and how honest you are with it.
Yeah.
Both, all sides. So yeah.
Yes. Oh, I like that's going to be our little clip for this podcast.
Oh,
Like I
you're
just
gonna,
thought that's such a good quote. Like, but what else are you doing?
yeah,
Like, tell me what you're really doing.
yeah.
Okay, I do want to ask you more about the standardization because you and I did talk a little bit about the Yoga Alliance before we hit record. Hello, Yoga Alliance. I hope you look nice today. I hope you had a great breakfast. Your shoes are amazing. You have great taste. Okay, so now let's talk about standardization because we have no recourse. I mean, they've just decided it's 200 hours. Okay, fine. In the 90s when this started, that
Mm.
probably seemed pretty reasonable, to be honest. Like before all the money flooded in the industries and chips started as yoga pants, like that was probably a pretty reasonable assumption that you would have practiced and then you would do 200 hours and then you could cover for your teacher so they could go to Bali for a month. That was how it
Well,
worked.
or you can go to Bali with your teacher and become a yoga teacher and come back. So
Yeah.
you can lie on the beach. You can lie on the beach and have these beautiful, fancy, vegan, organic food, and then get to be a yoga teacher and then come back with. So that is also possible. Yeah, there is absolutely no, what do you say? I like the word rigor, though. I know it gives such. I don't mean it in an ableist way. I'm not saying that,
Yeah.
everybody should be like, so doing this, that, whatever. But there has to be some sort of uh, a container which is in integrity with what we want to teach, and what are some of the foundations for that, more anatomy, more cueing if it is asana. And I tell this to my mentees, to people who I mentor, to start with the most simplest things, which you feel you've practiced 1,000 times, and then you know how it feels in your body. You attended to it in different points in your own life, and then you can say, okay, now I know how to do this, and this is how I would like to share it, rather than you go to a course or a YTT and then you're like, oh my god, I know how to do this, and then go start teaching it. Like, that is not what is a good way to be a teacher. And if we were to draw parallels to other programs and other professions, um, then we can learn so much from people who are doing physiotherapy and all those things, which are so much more detail oriented about people's safety. And I'm not only talking about physical safety, though physical safety is a big issue, because so many people I know have injuries through yoga asana. they get pushed, and they have like terrible lifelong injuries with their back and their hips and knees and all of that. So are we teaching teachers to be offering a safe space even in the most tangible way, which is a physical way, leave alone the spiritual and the emotional? Like that is
Yes.
like a whole another thing, which it shouldn't be. But even if you are to talk about the most basic thing, I don't think the YTT prepares enough. And that's why what happens then is, typically a student will go and spend thousands of dollars figuring out what they don't know, you know. I've seen that happen so many
Yes.
times. I see so many people coming to some of my courses which are about, some of the basic questions I ask, like what even is yoga, like what is it, do you know what yoga is? And these are people who have done like 500 hours,
And you'll be
and
like, no.
they're like, oh, they'll give some things like, oh, it's a union of mind body spirit. I'm like, okay, we have a lot of things to unlearn. So um my thing is that we have to go back to what those basic standards are, and um, define that more. And who gets to decide that more? Are the people who are deciding that yoga teachers? Because who are the people who are deciding this in Yoga Alliance, for example? Like, who are they? What do they know about yoga? Who are they who are they getting counseling from, like consulting from? So have many questions, and I think it's important for us to have leaders who can ask those questions. Because what happens again, and I've seen this as a witness, is people use people of color as front people. They will have, like, for example, you criticize a organization, any yoga organization, right? And um, they will have like a panel discussion with people of color, trans people, people with disabilities, all the marginalized. They've checked the boxes. Okay, there is one panel discussion, and there is one program here with all these people, right? So they have these offerings, and they'll say like, oh, we are doing the work, right, of DEI work, right, which is this whole another thing, which is nothing, where the granularity of the change is, they are not even going to do that, because that means that they are going to bust the economic, the financial power of their own little group, right?
Yeah.
So they are fronting all the, doing the right things by the image of it, having all these things, but they're really not doing any great changes within the organization, or who is the leader, like in the leadership, right? So yeah, like I said, I'm finding it very hard to be optimistic about yoga. I'm not optimistic about the yoga world. Yoga is a part of my life. So there you go.
I mean, I think you highlight it, right? Like, so, and this happens again, not just in organizations. I mean, this happens in university settings. This
Yeah.
happens in studio settings where you do the right things. Like, I Tristan Katz on the podcast a while ago, and Tristan talked about how, like, you can hang the pride flag in your window, and you can put the BLM sticker in your window, but what are you doing on the inside to facilitate safe space for those humans? And they're totally right in that. And we need to hold bigger organizations accountable for that too. Like, those bigger organizations are doing their version of hanging the BLM sticker on their window and not doing anything, and then doing what we've always done.
And the thing is, what is sad? And I feel really sad about this, because I feel the people who are used, are people of of marginalized identities. So there is a feeling of scarcity anyway among people
Sure.
of color, and people who feel like, oh wow, they're being seen finally. So I don't blame the people who are, uh, who are in the front of an organization, or doing a panel discussion, or a whatever. I don't blame that, but I say, for the people who are receiving it, who are witnessing it, let's really be more discerning about why and how this is happening, and what's happening behind that image. Is important for us to really dig into and unravel, if we want to really shift the dominant culture in yoga, and how that seeps in.
Well, and it becomes from an outsider perspective, I feel like it has to be tricky, right? This idea of any opportunity is at least an opportunity. Like, can
Yeah.
you work into the organization from that position? You know what I mean? So it becomes, it's not as straightforward as just deciding I'm not going to participate in this organization or in this training program or whatever.
Right.
Um,
It's
because,
not. It's
and
not easy.
yeah,
But we need to also. It's not. Nothing is easy. Everything is quite
yeah,
hard,
yeah,
and
yes.
everything is quite complex. But the problem is that we are stopping at the simple solutions. We're stopping at the superficial, like do's and don'ts, and all that. If we are to really shift culture, which is it's chipping away at it. It is people asking questions. It is people continuously asking questions, and people who have privilege have more roles to play in this. People who have any sort of privilege have more roles to play in this, because otherwise the marginalized people are first of all doing the labor, and they are also, and I consider myself in in some levels privileged and some levels I'm not. um and that's why I ask the questions and do the work that I do, because I feel like I do have safety in so many ways. I can challenge uh, people who are holding caste supremacy, who are religious fundamentalism in yoga spaces, racism in yoga spaces. So in so many ways, since I have the privilege, I'm leveraging what I have in the ways that I know best, and not perfectly. So people who have privilege have more of a responsibility to challenge those ways in which dominant culture shows up in yoga. And that is not where we stop. We then look at how that informs other institutions where that is happening outside as well.
So if we have these little fledgling humans in our teacher training programs, does that conversation belong in a teacher training program, or is that a conversation we're having somewhere else where yeah, YTT is just to teach people how to do this job, and the conversations about deconstructing and shifting and changing in that is, does that belong inside a YTT, do you think?
I think yes, because this is a part of being ethical.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
we are creating or co-creating a community of the next generation yoga teachers, right? So it's our responsibility to do that in a way which feels that we are shifting the culture. And I feel like that's so. For example, I did a cohort of Black and brown people only talking about caste and religious fundamentalism in yoga, because that is huge and it is an unsaid thing, right? Nobody knows how to address it. It is quite complex. And I do it because, and I haven't written a book or anything, though I can, but I haven't, because I hopefully in some future year I will. But I feel like I'm giving so much of my labor in terms of my wisdom, not because I can't write it in a book and then make thousands more, but I feel like I'm hoping to cultivate a community that can challenge that as they teach, because most of them are space holders, most of them are scholars who come to some of my classes, because they come to these kind of classes where they don't get it in anywhere else. So they don't have a South Asian talking about caste, for example. And I have caste privilege, so I get people who are from caste marginalized groups to talk about the issues. And I'm sharing this because I feel that uh, as people who are training teachers, we are not only giving information, but we are really shaping the next generation of
Yeah.
yoga teachers. And that is a huge responsibility. It is not something that you take lightly. And that's why I'm very particular now. And I've gone through the stage of like, I've taught at all the YTTs that came my way. I'm like, oh, I'm getting to teach, it's so wonderful. And now I teach maybe one. And that too, very like, I'm very particular about what is being taught and how it is received. And I'm very passionate about shaping Black and brown folks as mentees, because that is not often, that avenue isn't there for us. I struggled, and I still do, for finding somebody who I can look up to and say, hey, what would you do with this? Because as it's very topical, and it is very sort of localized. All these issues are sort of localized in our own lived experience. Not that I don't have friends who I can go to who are not from my identity, but uh, certain things only that person from that identity can understand.
Yeah.
And the mentee mentor relationship, I think, is sacred in so many ways. And that is important for us to build, even in our communities, even when you're doing your YTTs, having that person who a person can go to and say, hey, you know what, I had this issue, what do you think? Or can you help me unravel this a little bit more, or whatever. um, i think I think those are some of the things that we have to look at when we are building that next generation. I'm totally looking into how I can do that in a more uh, formal way.
I think you're exactly right. And actually, you're not the only person in the series who's brought up the staggering lack of mentorship. That's been also one of my challenges within the yoga space is a lack of mentorship, and a
Mhm.
lack of teaching people what it is to hold sacred space, spiritual space, because that's a different sort of thing, especially for yoga studio owners, because and I'm using somebody else's work here, this idea that we are for a community but not of a community, this
Mhm.
idea that our
Mm.
job is to hold the community, but you don't get to be a part of it in the way that other people get to be a part of it. And in religious spaces, folks have training on how to deal with that, and we talk amongst
Mm.
ourselves, like in a Christian space, in a Catholic space, priests
Yeah,
get that training, right?
yeah,
And they
yeah,
talk
yeah.
amongst themselves. We don't do that, but a lot of the space that we hold feels sacred in a similar way. And I'm like,
Absolutely.
why do we not do this?
Absolutely. I think there is so much magic that happens when like teachers talk, right? I mean, people like us,
Yeah.
right? Who have
Yes. Yes.
done faculties, who have been on faculties, and you're like, oh wow, how do I, what do I do with this? Like there is so much community that is lacking in our, at least I don't know, maybe I'm not a part of it. Um I
I
don't
would
know.
invite you.
No, but I'm
It's
just
not
saying.
there.
Okay, good. So yeah, so I think that is missing, and I don't know whether there is a way to herd us all together. Like, how do you even manage that? But there has to be some ways in which we can see. Those are the things that Yoga Alliance should be able to offer, right?
Yes. I
As
was
a
just going to say
Yeah.
that.
So what is the quote unquote, if you were to use a capitalistic term, what is the value of being in this thing? I remember yesterday I went somewhere and somebody asks me, like, what do you do? So how people ask you. So I said,
Yeah.
nowadays I just say something very random because nobody will get what I say. So I say I teach yoga. So they're like, which style? So I'm like, I don't teach a style. I teach yoga philosophy and history. Oh, but which style? I'm like, okay, this is not really happening. So I said, yeah, I just teach teachers and that's it. And then I just sort of move on. But I was like, there is no even understanding of what people are talking about when they're talking about philosophy and history. And it's a 3,500 to 4,000 year old thing that we are talking about, right? And
Yeah.
how many people even know the history of it? I can count on my fingers, and whoever is doing that work are scholars and cis men, uh, Brahmins, as well as European, right? So it's a
Yes.
very sort of a rarefied group of people who get to do that. And so my work is to actually say, yes, we need the rigor to do the research and da da da. But if you're using language which nobody understands, then what is the point of it? Right?
What is
So
the point?
what is the point of it? So my work is to really bridge the gap. So I'm in this sort of a liminal space of not being here, not being there. It's a wild world, but it is what it is.
It is. I'm so glad you said that, because this is the first time. I mean, we're going to be 85 episodes, 90 episodes in by the time this airs. Like, I've talked to a lot of people about yoga. This idea, especially yoga, because there's like yoga that we all do in the real world, and then there's yoga that scholars do, and they're separate, and nobody has said they're all cis men. And I'm just like, well, I see it because I see their pictures.
Yeah. There's cis men only now. Okay, so in India there are cis Brahmin men, and then here there are European cis men. And I'm not negating or undermining the work at all.
Yes.
I'm saying they're doing really good work. But who has access to the work? Not only in terms of
Yes.
access, as in like, okay, where do I find it? But even in terms of the language of it, the vocabulary of it, who has access to it? So that is the problem. I think that is a real problem that we have to address, and that's what my work addresses.
Oh my God. Like, I want to talk to you forever about
I know,
really,
like,
really, I mean, because it is a problem. If like, because it comes from academia, there's a perceived value and gravitas to their work that is different than the value and gravitas that we out here within the industry playing amongst ourselves are like doing. And we're mostly women, as we said, and they're nearly, and I can think of, I'm only thinking of one person that I can think of that works two. Okay, I've got two people who work in the educational world who are women who are doing this work, and both of the people I'm thinking of are white.
Yep.
So like
it is absolutely true. So it's funny, and I'll be very honest with you. I'm working on a proposal, and it's very dense. And I get people telling me, oh, this is too academic, like it's too dense, it is too esoteric. It's not really, but I'm doing research and da 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 da. So they're like, it's too academic. So that is the one thing that I get from a publisher. And then the other person is like, it's too radical, like you're talking about caste and religious fundamentalism, da, 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 oppression and all of that. So it's too radical. So then there is like, and then you're like, but then if I don't do the rigor and share that, like I'm a conduit of the rigor of the scholarship that exists, then how are people even going to get it? Right? So that is the thing that we have to balance. There is a rigor to what we are doing, and we are sharing it in a way which feels relatable and accessible, without oversimplifying anything, because that is a problem. Oversimplification and categorization are tools of oppression. Let's keep it very simple, let's categorize everything. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. I feel like I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So, Anjali, if you were a guy, would they tell you it was too academic, do you think?
Exactly. Would they? Would they? Or if I had a doctorate in my
yes,
title. So I have this love-hate relationship with academia. I love academia because I'm a nerd, and I study and I learn from it. And I also feel like there is an elitism attributed to a certain label, which is a very colonial thing to do. So we have to think about that as well. Like, why are we considering a few people more um having that gravitas, and why we are not? If you're And I'm not dissing all the people who are doctorates and all of that. I appreciate them so much, because there is a dedication to doing that, um and there's an honesty in that, I hope. So I'm not saying that either. I love listening to some of those people talk about their work, but I also want to address that there is an elitism to it, which which is a sort of inherent in academia. So to bridge those two is what I really want to do. Really bridge that and bring it to the world is what I really want to do, and that's what I hope to be doing in some way or the other, in my classes and in my podcasts and all of that.
Will you tell everybody where to find you so that we can all just go fangirl now? Because I'm like literally just gonna follow you everywhere. Like really, really.
Thank you. Well, I'm pretty active on Instagram for now, and that's where most of my work is.
Now.
That and yeah.
Thank you for having this conversation. It was the best.
I loved having this conversation too.
Thank you so much for joining me to chat, Anjali. Here are our key takeaways. First, training is a huge responsibility within the industry. And we often have challenges that we need to address when we decide to run teacher trainings. I've said this before on the series, but a lot of times the reason why people train, studios in particular, is because they're looking for qualified candidates to work at their studio. Now, is this ideal as far as conditions for training? I don't know, but it certainly isn't the "my yoga studio can't make it without training" story that we are often telling each other as we talk about how saturated our markets are. Next, I am so glad Anjali brought this up. Training yoga teachers and deepening your knowledge of yoga are not the same thing. They should not be the same program. We need to offer a diverse menu of yoga knowledge enhancement options in our yoga studios, not just only group classes and YTTs. I cannot say this enough times. Next, so Anjali said something I want to highlight. It is this idea that deep yoga practice is something that you should enjoy. She's right. A lot of yoga is groundbreaking and uncomfortable. While the changes you create as a result of a deep yoga practice can be highly beneficial and ultimately enjoyable, the process to get there is hard, and we should not be saying anything different to our students or our yoga teacher trainees. Next. Hey friends, I know that saying things like social justice is a great way for you to attract a certain kind of person to your doorstep, but there is a disrespect at best and danger at worst when we use the phrase social justice like a marketing term. People deserve better. The Black, queer, disabled communities that we support deserve better, so please stop. Thank you very much. Next. There is no checklist that makes you a good white yoga person. I'm sorry if this is news, but the willingness to have discussions, unpack your own privilege, and as Anjali asks, what else are you doing, is a great place to start. And finally, this is another one of the things the series has mentioned constantly, mentorship. If you're an experienced yoga teacher, please consider how you can mentor the next generation of yoga teachers so that they can have a nurturing and supportive environment to learn the skill set of teaching yoga. Maybe it's meeting for coffee or just getting together as professionals every once in a while. There are 1,000 ways that you can be a mentor. Consider thinking about that as your addition to our industry. Now, I want to thank you so much, friends, for listening to the podcast. I am so grateful that you're here, and I'm so grateful that you're listening. I will catch you around the water cooler next time.